Now, the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation says the federal government spent over half of its earnings from oil and gas in 2018 for the payment of the joint venture cash calls. I have with me Kola Karim, the chairman of Shoreline Group, and he joins us to discuss this and other policies impacting Nigeria's oil and gas sector today. But Kola, before we get into that story, though, but I'd like to first get a sense of you on what has played out in the oil space in the past 24 hours with Venezuela.
I think oil prices have firmed up because of the power cuts in Venezuela is hugely impacted oil production, and that's scaling up the shortages around the global oil market itself. Then Iran is another big factor because the renewal of the waivers for Iran is coming up next month, and that alone is creating jitters in the market because nobody knows what America is going to do, if they're going to stop the waivers in totality or continue renewing the waivers as well. So with all this variations to the industry is creating jitters and firming up prices, which is good for Nigeria.
All right, and let's bring it back home now. I'd like to get your assessment on the joint venture cash calls in Nigeria and how that is playing out.
Look, I think one important thing is this. Government has been able to negotiate, as you saw last year, with the oil industry for the joint venture cash calls that's been owed, and negotiated that into a firm position where government really saved a lot of money. What has happened going forward is government is positioned to the oil companies that you can now go and look for funding that will fund part of the government's joint venture cash call itself. So it's more in a financing structure. That would ease the pressure on the federal government and NNPC, or through NNPC, paying their part of the cash call, which is very, very good for the industry. It makes it easier to plan projects now because the financing is becoming more certain in the whole structure, medium to long term.
Well, but the comments from the Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission says that we've been losing about $14 billion every year on the JV calls.
This is my perspective. I think what they're calculating is this. If federal government via NNPC is not paying its cash call, then the targeted projects to increase in revenue now and the future is not going to happen. And that's what they're banking on. So if with the way it's been proposed today, that joint venture partners can go and put funding packages together that will fund the projects, also funding NNPC's portion, that will ease the revenue position for the country and the revenue generation for the country itself.
All right, but then I would like you to speak to it because we're looking at how the sector can generate revenues in there. What do you make of the gas commercialization program? Look,
I think one of the most interesting thing the government has done now is tying gas commercialization into renewals of licenses across board. What that means is in the next 2 to 3 years, with proper monitoring and enforcement from government, Nigeria will end up becoming a net exporter of gas. Because look, we are traditionally a gas country than an oil country. What has happened is over the years, the commercialization of gas in itself is not been in the fore. But today, putting it in the fore, making it more commercially viable for people to explore and exploit is sound business judgment. So what will happen is enforcing that and making it work for Nigeria and Nigerians will be an amazing benefit, and the West African gas pipeline is there. So once Nigeria could use and satisfy its own needs in gas, we could export as a country. Again, an LNG is an example. Train 5 that's coming. Train 7 that's coming on at NLNG. There's a lot of other gas projects that could be in play and effective for Nigeria to generating fantastic income.
Do you think we really now need to tweak our gas strategy to make sure that it's at the forefront of our oil and gas policy?
It is critical. First, for environmental reasons, the world is looking away from oil. You saw the announcement from Shell last week, which says by the year 2050, they're looking more of being a power company than an oil company. But if you look at Exxon, Exxon is looking the other way. So global strategy is important for Nigeria as a nation, looking at our oil industry, but the focus of Nigeria should be in the gas sector. One, it's cleaner, it's better, and it's easier to explore and exploit, and it's also easier to fit into pipelines that are already existing in the West African zone and building the corridors around Nigeria and the Trans-Saharan pipeline as well.
All right, but looking into the next 4 years, though, then how should we tweak policy, to fit what the sector is facing?
Look, my main advice is government's focus should be more on developing a gas industry, a gas value chain that will be beneficial to the Nigerian economy, and more importantly, environmentally friendlier to Nigeria, and that in itself can generate and guarantee future financial growth for Nigeria's stability.
All right, then, but let's look at the incoming Senate now. Whereas the ninth Senate, we had a lot of talk around the petroleum industry bill from the previous Senate, and we saw all the years go by, and some traction happened. But then looking at this next, is this where we're going to see things play out for the petroleum industry bill?
Look, the current Senate is still there, but May 29th and the next one, what is important is this. The PIB is an essential lifeblood of the oil and gas industry. We understand that as practitioners in the industry. Government also realizes that. Yeah. So it's a key, important, decisive decision that needs to be made. Are we going to get it through so we could unlock the oil and gas industry? So Nigeria in itself, as a nation state, could attain its potentials. So the PIB is very important, and our hope as practitioners in the industry is the next Senate will put it as a principle in front of itself in making sure the PIB is delivered for the sake of the oil and gas industry.
But are we seeing that feedback sent to the government from indigenous players like yourself who are well vested in the oil and gas space, coming together to make that position to government and the Senate to make sure that these things roll out faster?
Look, all the different meetings that's been had by the local and the international is the key successes built around the PIB is an important instrument and a decisive one for the success of the industry as a whole. So it is important and paramount for government and for us to make sure we come to a decision. The PIB's importance is sacrosanct to the future of this business.
Okay, but looking into the rest of the year, I'd like to get your call on oil prices, though. We've seen how things are playing out with Venezuela.
Look, my view is this. I think oil prices for the rest of the year, 70, 75 would be a benchmark to look at, because with the political situation that's playing out in Venezuela, we're still waiting to see how it unravels and where we end up. With Iran, I think we've got a sort of landing in where we're going. There is a renewal process. Why? Because America in itself, looking at an election in 2020, cannot afford very high oil prices. So they're trying to manage in the situation and keeping it stable. I see there will be a renewal for Iran to continue exporting oil. In turn, that will give stability to the oil sector.
All right, then. Thank you so much for your contribution on the show today. I've been speaking to Kola Karim, he's the chairman of Shoreline Group.